So good morning or good afternoon from wherever you are. Again, thank you for the time you spend with us this afternoon for this webinar. So our webinar, we will be looking at revisiting oil spill response capability review. So basically, we will look at the oil spill response capability review as a preparedness tool, and we would like to share some of our common findings when we conduct our oil spill response capability review. This webinar will be presented by my colleague Shahreena. So Shah, can you introduce yourself?
Yep. Thanks, Norman. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Shahreena, and I'm a senior consultant based here in Singapore. I've been with OSRL for about 7 years now, looking mainly into the development and management of oil spill preparedness projects in the region. So projects I've worked on, of course, include capability reviews, contingency plans, developing trainings and incident management exercises across the Asia-Pacific region, as well as also in the African regions as well.
Thanks, Shah. So I'm Norman Ramos. I am a principal consultant and trainer in OSRL. And me and Shahreena, actually, we started on the same day in OSRL. So I'm also 7 years in OSRL already. So for myself, I've been working with Shahreena on numerous capability reviews within the region. And at the same time, I've conducted a number of trainings, incident management system, IMO level trainings in Asia Pacific. So again, as we have mentioned, what we would like to talk about this afternoon is the use of oil spill response capability review as a preparedness tool. And we would like to share with you some common findings that we always observe when we are conducting oil spill response capability review. And all of these are based on our experience. So the first part, we will have Shahreena talk through about oil spill capability reviews.
Okay, thank you, Norman. So like Norman has mentioned, we will look at how capability review is actually used as a tool to improve preparedness. And before we delve a bit more into it, I would like to bring your attention to this really colorful wheel here. And the question that follows here is, how prepared are you to handle a spill? So if, say, we look at the oil and gas industry, oil spill risk can actually occur practically in any stages of the oil supply chain. So it can range from upstream activities like your exploration and production, all the way to the downstream activities such as distribution and shipping. So really, whenever we talk about preparedness, it is really referring to our capability to handle a spill in the unlikely event of an incident. So this question of how prepared are you to handle the spill is actually a critical question for an organization to ask itself. And this wheel here highlights the 4 critical elements that can be used to briefly assess an organization's preparedness. So I sort of look at it like an equation. So if there is any missing link in this preparedness equation, it's like highly likely will affect your ability as an organization to lead an effective response. Okay, so if let's say we look here, this is competent personnel. The question we should ask is, do you have the people who are equipped with the right knowledge and the right skill set to be able to respond effectively to an oil spill? Okay, and then here is well-developed plans. Do you have a plan in place? And it's not good enough to just have a plan and then chuck it in one corner, but are these plans updated? Does it reflect your current operational risks? Okay. Adequate resources. Do you have access to adequate resources? And if let's say we talk about equipment, are the equipment suitable for the type of oil that you're handling? Okay, so it's not good enough to just have your plans and resources in place. You need to ensure that your plans are robust. You need to ensure that your resources are ready to respond. And the only way to ensure this is actually via regular exercises. So you get to test out your plan, your equipment, and it also helps your personnel to familiarize with their role. Because take note that responding to an oil spill is not someone's day-to-day job. So once an organization understands the missing link in their oil spill response capability, it forms a basis for planning their journey towards improving preparedness. Okay. So we'll look a bit more into capability review. So the way I like to describe capability review is an excellent way for an organization to start their process of preparedness. Essentially what it does, it helps to assess both your current as well as your future capability to cope with potential developments. And it identifies gaps. So it's interesting because usually whenever I talk to clients or to our members, the word that is associated with capability review is always gaps. So it's like, oh yes, okay, I need to identify the gaps in preparedness. But I'd like to, like spin a different angle to it. It's also looking at what your organization have been doing well in terms of maintaining preparedness. So, and what follows is of course recommendations on how you can close out, how you can look into your areas for improvement. In a one line, essentially what it gives you is an understanding of where your organization stands at in terms of how prepared you are to respond to a spill. Okay, so if we look here, like everything else, OSRL follows industry good practice when conducting our capability review. In order to assess your preparedness level, we will look at your spill response plans. We'll look at your training and exercise programs, as well as your equipment, if your equipment is suitable for your operations. Okay, so this flow chart here shows how we typically conduct a capability review here in OSRL. And I would like to bring your attention to this site visit element. Of course, this is something that we would recommend to our client because it provides added value to the capability review process. We believe like when we have a face-to-face interview, we have a better sense of what the people within the organization is comfortable or not comfortable with. They are probably more willing to share about their experience in handling a spill, whether it's an exercise or an actual response. And of course, it makes it easier for us to conduct a visual inspection of equipment stockpile. But over the years, what we realize is that there's actually an increasing trend of clients requesting us to conduct capability reviews remotely. So these involve plenty of email communications or teleconferencing with people from various departments within the organization. So it's a lot of logistical arrangements, but it works out. And with regards to looking at their equipment condition, we have them send through pictures or their maintenance record. So this remote work we have been doing over the past years actually comes very much in handy now, given the current global pandemic situation, where we are not able to visit our client site. So we actually realized that conducting capability reviews remotely could be a new norm for a while now. So we are currently working into refining our methods, looking into exploring the option of a virtual site visit, just to maintain the quality on, provide a even better quality deliverable. So these steps here, if you look here, these steps here actually look into the client's tiered capability in terms of tier 1, 2, and 3 resources. So we have already moved away from defining tiers according to volume for a while now. So with that, the way we assess the organization is to first look at the tier 2 and tier 3 resources, because ultimately that's what's already available to you. And the question is just how soon will these resources get to you? And then from there, we suggest what an appropriate level of your tier 1 should be to sustain a response till your tier 2 or 3 resources comes in. Okay? So of course, all these steps are actually followed through if a client wants to do a full-scale capability review. But at times, the client might need us to only assess a specific aspect of their capability, like for example, just looking at equipment. So for example, this picture here is actually taken from one of our projects that we did a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, in which the client wanted us to assess not only their equipment, but also that of the tier 2 provider. And from there, we will actually use a systematic checklist, very clearly defined requirements. So it helps us to categorize the gaps identified according to conformance level, say major, moderate, minor, no gap. And then a detailed analysis of a recommendation will also be provided. So this is up to where here, where OSRL drives the capability review. If you look at these other output, which is the prioritization of gap closure, this actually needs the management of the organization to drive it, because ultimately they will be the one who will have to agree on a reasonable time frame and agree on implementation methods to close the gap accordingly. So OSRL can support, but it has to be driven by the organization itself. So having these outputs here actually help to ensure that the investment that is being made in the oil spill capability actually meets the needs of your operation. Okay. So this timeline here is actually an example of a preparedness journey in which OSRL works hand in hand with a member company to improve their capability for a global asset. So just to highlight here that this by all means doesn't mean that it's an ideal preparedness journey. Neither is it a templated one. We recognize that different organizations have their own unique journey towards improving their capability, and it varies a lot from one organization to another. Okay, so for this particular client, they started off with an oil spill response capability review to have an understanding of where their global assets stand in terms of their preparedness to respond to an oil spill. Okay, and then OSRL followed through with assisting them with the gap closure action plan, which was driven by themselves. Okay, and from there you can see that oil spill response capability review fits nicely in a series of process steps. So it's not like a standalone, okay, we'll do a capability review and then tick off the box and that's it. So a lot of times plan development as well as training and exercises, improvement areas are identified out of a capability review. Okay, so it's actually important to observe the journey not like a linear timeline, but rather an ongoing process of improvement. Because if let's say you test your plan through training and exercises, you identify areas for improvement or something that is not practical, it gets feedback. It should get feedback into your plan, and then you have to test your plan again. And so over the years, Norman and myself, we have collectively conducted plenty of capability reviews, both for our upstream as well as our downstream clients. And from there, we notice a trend in the areas where they tend to lack in preparedness in their spill response capability. So in this second part of the webinar, we will share with you 5 of these common findings. Okay, and the first up is this question of, do my planning scenarios accurately represent the oil spill risks? So this is a very crucial question. I feel that we tend to assess first thing because selecting the correct oil spill scenario serves as a basis for defining an effective response capability, and which is actually commensurate to your operational risks. And we often find that the answer to this question is a no. So if you look at it, this is an example of an oil spill risk assessment, and I kind of break it into 2 parts. So the first one here is identifying the events that lead to an oil spill and also characterizing these events. So it's sort of like telling a story. What kind of oil is released, where is it released, what is the volume we are looking at, and then it shouldn't stop there. So sometimes what we realize is that it tends to stop there. So we're just, okay, this is what we know. This is the spill, the oil type, and then this is where it's being released, and then full stop. But there's actually a critical element of looking at, for each identified scenario, understanding the potential environmental as well as socio-economic impact. So this can be done via either modeling, to give you a forecast of oil trajectory and fate based on your oil property as well as on the local conditions, as well as understanding the evaluation of potential sensitive resources at risk of impact from oiling. Okay, so combining these two actually provides you an estimate of the severity of the oil spill, and it's actually critical in evaluating the risks associated with the spill scenario. Okay, so the idea is to actually give a full picture rather than just the bits and pieces of it. Okay. So from the timeline that you see just now, you will know that contingency planning is not a one-time event. When you talk about contingency plans, it has to be dynamic. The information in it needs to be updated, reviewed to ensure it is still relevant. So these here are a few few of the more common gaps we typically encounter when assessing spill response plans. The first one here is not representative of current operations. At times we encounter plans which were developed for let's say a drilling campaign, and it gets recycled or imported for a production campaign, or it can be from a previous drilling campaign that's nearby, and then it's being recycled for one that is, that is ongoing. So this should not be the case, because we realize that the risks is different, and you need to relook into the risks as well as the capability. Here is the outdated contact list, which is a very common issue. So often with restructuring within the organization, the contact list still reflect names of those who have already left the organization or no longer take on that role. So one solution or one recommendation that we usually propose is to maintain the contact list as a live document, so that and have it referenced in your plan, so that each time the contact list is revised, you do not have to constantly update the plan. Okay, the next one here is new legislation. It can impact the way you respond. So it needs to be considered and edited in your plan as well. So for example, it can be changes in approved response techniques, or changes in regulation involving, say, import of equipment, for example. Okay, and the next one is lacks crucial information. So yeah, it can be about what are your tiered resources available, not indicated in the plan, or even if it is, you need to have an idea of what is the estimated time for these resources to reach to your spill site. Okay, and all this, I feel, stems from the fact that there is no system of review and evaluation of these plans. So in some countries, the regulation dictates a system of review of the approved plans. So be it like maybe every 3 years or so. But in some countries, they don't. And in the absence of that, organizations themselves need to implement their own program of review and update to ensure sustained readiness. So if you look at this flow chart here, this is actually adapted from the IPCA IUGP Good Practice Guide, and it illustrates the contingency planning process. So you can see here that review and update is actually a crucial part of the process. So it just doesn't stop at conducting training exercises. You still need to review and update. So you need to ensure that there's a procedure for the review process, maintain document control to prevent confusion, and also prevent misuse of outdated versions. We typically get asked on when and how plan updates should occur. And here are the main points in line with statutory regulation, like I've mentioned. And also looking at the operations, are there any risk change? So for example, if new assets are introduced, or if let's say you are dealing with additional oil types. So all these will impact and change your planning, which means that new strategies and capabilities needs to be relooked and devised. Okay. And also here, if you have any feedback from exercises and actual response, what work or what's not so practical in the plan, that changes need to be reflected as well. Okay, so we have talked about plans updates. Now the question is, how often do you put your plan to test? And it's not just plans, it's about testing your people as well and testing your equipment. So a few of the operators we meet, they do not actually have a training and exercise program. And the successful implementation of a response really depends on the competence of personnel involved. So training and exercise is actually a good way for them to practice in their pre-assigned emergency roles. So if you look at these pictures, we have practical deployments of equipment in the operating environment. You should consider having training of people to familiarize themselves with their roles. Okay, and then any valuable lessons that are learned from conducting these exercises is always a value add in the case of an incident. Okay, so I will now hand it over to Norman. He will highlight a few important considerations to take note of when implementing a training and exercise program.
Okay, thanks, Shah.
Okay.
So there are some guide questions that you can use when you are considering a training and exercise program. So a couple of those questions are listed on this slide. So first and foremost, what are the types of training and exercises is relevant to my organization? So trainings like, do I need equipment training for my operators? Do I need incident management training for my supervisors and managers? Do I need exercise to ensure that the consistency and relevancy of these trainings are applied? So all of these questions are need to be answered by the organization to ensure the competency and relevancy of their personnel when they are addressing or assisting in an oil spill response. Questions like how often should this be conducted? Should this be conducted once a year? Should this be conducted twice a year? Different organizations would approach this differently, but definitely the answer to how often or how frequent, this should be directly proportional to the risk that you have. If you have high risk operations, then it should mean that a lot of these exercises should be done frequently. Who can conduct these trainings and exercises? So you can do this internally or you can do this with external support to facilitate your trainings and exercises. And the last part of it is basically documenting the training and exercise record so that in the event of spill or any incident, you know who will be the personnel that has been trained or has the competency or relevancy on that aspect of the spill or incident. So that's those are the first three common things that we observe during capability review. The fourth one, and it is quite frequent also, is this one. When was the last time I checked that equipment? So most of the time when we do our site visits, there are a number of equipment that is spoiled and were unkempt and not maintained regularly. So as you can see from this slide, this photo here, this is a photo of an inland boom that was left to the mercy of the elements. It was exposed to both sun and rain all throughout. That's why this boom has been spoiled. And most of the time also, the issues that we find is about the hydraulic hoses. Apparently, what we learned is that most organizations has no idea that hydraulic hoses has some sort of a certain lifespan. So beyond this lifespan, these hydraulic hoses will tend to degrade or deteriorate. Normally, the hydraulic hoses are good for about 5 years. More than that, it should be recertified to make sure that it is still safe to use. Now, we say that hydraulic hoses are quite important bit of an equipment or ancillary because these hydraulic hoses are operated at a high temperature and high pressure. So if these hoses are spoiled, this can cause injury or can cause harm to the operator. So that's why it's really important for you to understand or for you to have that idea that maintenance is very important when you are keeping your equipment. And the last common finding that we have is Yes, organizations would have personnel, they have trained personnel, and yes, they have the necessary equipment. But the next question is what connects these two, right? You got equipment, you got people, but another important aspect to consider is the logistics. So it's not necessary you have the resources, but also you have to have the questions like how to move the resources from point A to point B, right? Yes, I have this equipment, I have these people, but how am I going to move them from the say from the office or from the warehouse going to the spill site? Other questions that you might ask is how to optimize my response time. I got people, I got trained people, I got good equipment, but what else can I do to optimize my response time? Third would be staging area. In an event of a spill, you would need staging area, wherein the staging areas are the temporary areas where you can have or where you can store your resources, whether personnel or equipment. And lastly, where should I get additional support? So in the next following slides, we will be answering these questions. Um, how to move the resources from point A to point B. So again, as I have mentioned, it's not important to have trained personnel or good equipment, but also you need supporting equipment, supporting equipment that could help you to move these resources from point A to point B. One experience that we have is when we did a capability review at a facility, they have a good warehouse of equipment. They got the booms in order, they got the skimmers in order. However, the only thing that I told them is that they got all of this equipment in the warehouse. However, they did not have the methodology to move this equipment to their jetty, which is 500 meters away from their warehouse. So that made them to think that how they're going to do it. Are they going to carry all of those heavy equipment via manual, or what else they can do? So this sort of things you have to ask with regards to your resources. Not only mobile equipment like forklift, but also think about the vessels. Would you need vessels when you are moving your equipment from one place to the other? If yes, have you already looked into your probable suppliers of this vessel of opportunity? And other equipment or other heavy equipment like trailers or flatbed trailer that could assist you in moving heavy equipment like this well capping device in this photo. Okay. Next is how am I going to optimize my response? So a quick observation that we find when we do our capability review is that most of the clients or organizations that we work with is that they arrange their equipment into not into set but into type of equipment. So in one part of the warehouse, you would see all of the booms are stored. In another part of the warehouse, all of the skimmers are stored. In another part of the warehouse, all of the ancillaries are stored. This is not the efficient way to do this. Remember that in an oil spill incident, time is of the essence. So the best way to do this is to group your equipment into a package rather than into type. So what do I mean by grouping equipment into a package? Say, for example, that you already know that based on your plan, you might have a shoreline, potential shoreline cleanup. If that's the case, what you can do is to group all your equipment that could potentially respond to a shoreline cleanup. So an example is this one. This trailer was arranged such that all of the necessary equipment for a shoreline cleanup or a shoreline booming is already inside this trailer. So at a given notice, this trailer can move together with all essential ancillaries, all the essential equipment to address us or to have a shoreline response. Similarly, on this photo here, this shows you a containerized package for an offshore response. So if you already know that you might have or potentially have an oil spill, offshore oil spill scenario, then it would be good to have a container wherein all of your necessary equipment for that offshore response are contained in that one container so that it's easy, it's convenient, and basically it will optimize the way you are handling your response. The other area is we mentioned is about staging area. So staging area, as I have mentioned, these are temporary locations wherein your resources can be temporarily stored. Most of the time, these staging areas may not be under your operation, which means that potential staging area might have a different owner or might have a different operator altogether. So based on your plans, if you know that this area will potentially be impacted by a spill, what you can do is, you can, during peacetime, you can already have some sort of arrangement to the operator or to the owner of that potential staging area, have some agreement. And so that at the time of a response, you can potentially have an access to those staging area. Um, these are small things, but actually this will add up to ensure that you will have a very, I would say, smooth and would have a very nice approach in addressing an oil spill or an oil spill incident. And lastly is, what other additional support should I be thinking of? Say, for example, I have a major spill that happened. I might require equipment coming from or coming from the country outside of my country, or I might require people or I might require personnel who are not of my countries or will be coming from another country. So part of that logistics would be identifying, say, what are the visa requirements if I would require people outside of my country to join or to assist in my response. I would also have to think about handover points, like for example, customs. How would I deal with customs if there are some equipment coming from outside of my country going in? So how can I efficiently get this equipment out of customs to get into the field? And aside from that, do I need aerial assets? Do I need additional dispersants? Do I need aviation support for my surveillance and for my dispersant? So all of these things, especially if I have a big operation, all of these things must come into play and must be seamless to ensure that all how we address the oil spill will be very smooth. So again, the quality of your logistics would commensurate to uh, the amount of your operation or to the complexity of your operation. So complex operation definitely would require complex logistics. At the same time, must be planned ahead so that no hiccups when you have an actual emergency. So just going back to the key points of this webinar. So Shahreena started off with talking about how an effective response looks like. It depends on the personnel, plans, regular exercises, and adequate resources. But how would you know what is your level? You would know your level by having your capability review. And again, by doing a capability review, we know that this will be an effective tool to identify the gaps for you to have this effective response. So after that, we talked about the common findings based on our experience when we are doing capability review. So first off is the inaccurate representation of risk during scenario development. So like what Shah mentioned earlier, perhaps you copied and pasted some of your plan before, and that would make it inaccurate because it may not represent the actual risk of a scenario or actual risk of the situation. Most of the time, outdated plans, we see a lot of this when we do our capability review, plans that were not reviewed after 5 years or after n number of years. Lack of periodic trainings and exercises. If you ask the people, they don't know what to do. We do understand that oil spill is not someone's day-to-day job, but again, people need to be prepared in the event of such incidents. Lack of limited equipment maintenance. So again, you have to, like any other equipment, it should be properly maintained. So even though you know you will not be using an oil spill equipment for the longest time, but you have to make sure that there must be a procedure in place for this equipment to be maintained properly. And last but not the least is quick logistical considerations. As I have mentioned before, It will depend on the complexity of your operations. If you have a big complex operation, a complicated operation, then definitely you would need to have a strong logistical support or strong logistical considerations. So this marks the end of the webinar unless there are questions. If you have questions, please do write it on the chat box. So as you are writing your questions, so let me just move on ahead. So these are some useful resources when you visit our website, oilspillresponse.com. You can find our response readiness dashboard for the COVID-19. You can also use the QR code that is shown on the slide to check this out. And please do, we have a featured article in our website right now, which is about climate change and oil spill. So this is a good article providing insights with regards to the effect of climate change and how it affects risks on oil spill. Remote training is already available. So we already have remote training for IMO level courses and also for incident management systems. So if you are interested, please do get in touch with us with regards to this remote training. And upcoming webinar for this month. So we have upcoming webinar tomorrow. This webinar will be hosted by our colleagues in Americas, and their topic is on preparedness priorities for offshore activities. So that is the end of the webinar. So we will be taking in questions now if you have. If you don't have a question now, that is fine. The slides show Shahreena's and my email address. So if you have further questions about capability review, please do not hesitate to contact us anytime, and we will do our best to respond to your queries. So if no questions, thank you so much for spending your time with us this afternoon to attend this webinar. And we hope that you find this webinar useful when you go back to your operations.
So like Norman has mentioned, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to any of us and we'll be very happy to help.
Hope to see you again in our webinar.